session for April 5th, 2023 will come to order. Let's have the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please, Lori.
Vice Chairman Richardson.
Here.
Secretary Grant.
Here.
Member Perez.
Here.
Member Aton.
Here.
Member Faison.
Here.
Member Garad.
Here.
Alternate Member Childs.
Here.
Alternate Member Rogers.
Here.
School Board Member Gilbert. Here.
We do have a quorum. Next item is approval of the minutes for March 22nd. Has everybody read them? Mr. Grant.
Mr. Chairman, I recommend we approve the minutes from March 22nd.
Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Member Aton seconds. Is there any discussion? Roll call, please.
Member Faison.
Yes.
Secretary Grant.
Yes.
Member Perez.
Yes.
Member Aton.
Yes.
Member Rogers.
Yes.
Vice Chairman Richardson.
Yes.
Member Garad.
Yes.
Okay. Chelsea, are there any quasi-judicial
Yes,
procedures? You wanna
the
go ahead and
conditional
read it?
use permit, I'll go ahead with the notice requirements for the members of the audience. All persons who anticipate speaking on any public hearing item must fill out an oath card to be heard on that agenda item and sign the oath contained thereon. These cards are located on the table near the entrance to the council chamber or may be obtained from the recording secretary. This meeting will be conducted in accordance to the procedures adopted in Resolution Number 24-1997. Those speaking in favor of a request will be heard first, those opposed will be heard second, and those who wish to make a public comment on the item will speak third. The applicant may make a brief rebuttal if necessary. A representative from either side, for or against, may cross-examine a witness. Anyone who speaks is considered a witness. If you have photographs, sketches, or documents that you desire for the commission to consider, they must be submitted into evidence and will be retained by the city. Please submit such exhibits to the recording secretary. Thank you.
Okay. We have no consent items. Old business. We're into new business number 9A, easement vacation application number 1, 2023. Eddie?
Thank you, sir. Good evening, commissioners. This is item 9A, beginning on page 8 of 145 of tonight's agenda. Item 9A, easement vacation application number 1, 2023 of 3585 Bell Arbor Circle. An application was submitted by property owners of 3585 Bell Arbor Circle, Vernon Robinson Jr. and Amelia Robinson, requesting the vacation of a portion of the existing public utility easement in order to construct a swimming pool. On pages 10 and 11, you'll find the staff analysis, which includes the no objections from each of the utility providers. And then on page 11 is the staff conclusion, which also found that there was no objection to the request to vacate 5 feet of the 10-foot utility easement. Thank you.
Does the commission have any questions of the staff? Okay, we'll open the public hearing and we'll hear from the applicant first.
I have one question,
Excuse
sir.
me.
The easements which are part of this plat are common to delineate easements generally for purposes of use potentially as opposed to specific easements. And this would be one where the lot itself is surrounded by easements that were prescribed. Generally speaking, this isn't an easement that was very specific to the design of the subdivision.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, Mr. Rogers.
I'm just unfamiliar with this kind of how this goes forward in the future. Do you ever run into a situation where an easement is granted and then later 5, 10, 20 years down the road, then somebody says, we kind of wish we hadn't done that? Is there, obviously right now there's not a problem, but, do you ever want to do you ever kind of wish that you had not granted an easement?
I have not personally run into that issue, but I could see where there is the potential. The utility providers are are contacted to make sure that they have no utilities currently in the easement area.
Right.
It's possible that a future, in hindsight, that they would have regretted that decision, but that's when we request these letters from the utility providers, they're supposed to be considering what future impacts this may have to their system as well.
Any other questions? Okay, I'll open the public hearing now, and we'll hear from the applicants first. Is the applicant here? Did you fill out a card? Well, you fill it out later.
Hi, I'm Amelia Robinson. My husband, Vernon Robinson. We're the applicants and homeowners of 3585 Bell Arbor Circle. During this process, we do want to construct a pool in the backyard, and I understand that there's a 10-foot easement in the back, which there's no utilities running underneath. And that's why, all the utility companies approved it, But that's why we're here, so we can see if we can get it granted, so we can build our pool.
Are there any questions of the applicant?
No, I just want to, well, I'm sorry, I have a
Go
question.
ahead.
So if you would please describe your property so that we know that there's no potential of future use of that easement. As I look at the pictures of your property right here, so you guys live in a nice neighborhood that has underground utilities that are already there, and there's already properties to your rear as well.
Yeah.
And so with you guys already having underground utilities in your neighborhood, we don't see a future use of anyone using that back portion that you guys are looking to reclaim. Is that
Yes.
about accurate?
Yes,
All the utilities are in the front
of
of the neighborhood.
there's nothing in the back.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any other questions? Anything else you'd like to say?
No, sir.
Okay, please give your card to the secretary.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else to speak on this item? Anyone else?
No more cards.
No more cards. I'll close the public hearing, and Commission, what would you like to do? Mr. Grant?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman?
Vice
Mr.
Chairman.
Vice Chairman.
Acting Chairman.
I recommend we approve ESA 1-2023 to vacate a portion of the 10-foot public utility easement on property located at 3585 Bell Arbor Circle.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? Mr. Payson?
No.
Okay. Any other discussion? Roll call, please.
Member Garad,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Richardson.
Yes.
Member Perez.
Yes.
Member Aton.
Yes.
Secretary Grant.
Yes.
Member Rogers.
Yes.
Member Faison.
Yes.
Okay. The item is recommended for approval, and it'll be heard at council next Tuesday, right?
Correct, April
Okay.
11th.
Okay. Next item, conditional use permit 9-2022, understand has been withdrawn. Is that correct? Correct. The third is conditional use permit number 10-2022.
Yes, sir. This item begins on page 27 of 145. The applicant is requesting a conditional use permit to expand an existing private school located at 257 Aguinaldo Drive. A conditional use permit is required for schools in the multifamily high-density residential R3 zoning district per section 28-255. Special exception number 6, 1985 was previously approved on the site to allow the expansion of a private school. Variance number 10, 1992 was approved to allow the private school to provide a minimum of 16 parking spaces. The subject property contains 2.43 plus or minus acres and continues to be used as a private school. The applicant is requesting to expand the school by adding one 3,600 square foot building in order to serve an additional 60 students. The future land use designation on the property is high density residential, and the zoning district is multifamily high density R3. The staff recommended 2 conditions of approval on this item. The first is relating to the playground fence, and the other is requesting that the applicant demonstrate the required landscape buffers on the site, the concept drawing for the site. The concept plan is shown on page 40 of tonight's agenda. And it's oriented where north is to the right, if you haven't changed the orientation of your page. So the southern extent of the playground is shown on the bottom left-hand corner, and the distance shown from the south property line to the fence is 41.9 feet. So the existing fence is encroaching into the required 50-foot setback for a playground for a school from a residential area by about 9 feet or eight and some change. So the condition of approval that staff is recommending is to relocate that fence so that it is outside the 50-foot setback.
Any questions of the staff? Mr. Grodd?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. Any? Mr. Rogers?
I did. I was trying to find this, but I haven't quite yet, but I'm sure you'll probably remember. I was just looking at the old, I think it dated back to 1985, sort of discussion on this previously. And I noticed that two of the members of this board or the commission had voted not to approve something because they said that it was like it wasn't the same, like the church owned the property, but it was not it was a tenant arrangement, not like the owner itself doing something. And do you recall what that issue was?
My understanding is that the property was previously owned by the church when the school was established.
Yes.
That is not currently the case.
Oh, okay. So, and perhaps they can speak to this if necessary, but then that particular issue, the church and the school are separate now at this point. They're not the same owner, not the same entity.
Correct.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, I'll open the public hearing. The applicant. Lois, I think you and I were the only ones that were in this room in 1985.
We might be. Very well be. I
In fact,
remember it
I
well.
think I was in this seat.
Were you one of the narrow-minded people that voted against it?
No,
Oh, okay.
no, I was not.
Mr. Ward, have you filled out a card? Yes, okay. Just making sure.
Say what?
I just want to make sure that everyone here who's here to speak has filled out a card before. Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am, I did.
I thought you were talking about the card from
Not my
1985.
first rodeo. Name is Lois Ward, 2520 Frontier Drive, Titusville. And I represent the owners Price LLC, who are the current owners of the property. There's a great need for it. I'm in receipt of the staff report, and we, on behalf of the owners, we concur with the conditions of approval and have no issues. So I'm here to answer any technical questions you might have. And oh, by the way, is anybody here in favor of this request? Would you raise your hand?
Even a rabbit raised your hand.
Yes, now I'm here for any questions you might have otherwise.
Does anyone have any questions of Mr. Ward? Mr. Rogers?
I do. I just wanted, it seems to me that going forward, even if at some point you decide to add another building, if that's possible, that the issue is going to be parking. Do you have, what are your plans to solve potential parking problems? I think there was a question of whether there would be quite enough space for the necessary parking now, but possibly, of course, in the future would be worse.
Well, with this addition, it's pretty well built out the site. There'll be little or more future additions, but to answer your question about the parking, the owners have obtained a parking agreement with the church to share parking, and a part of this plan is to put some additional paved parking along the road that's in the entrance.
Okay.
But they also have an easement through the church property, so most traffic will go through the church parking lot out to Hopkins. And
So-
there's parking available in there, and there's the church parking lot during school hours is pretty much empty.
And
So I don't see
vice
any
versa,
problem.
on Sundays, they need the parking that you
Right.
have.
Right.
That's a great arrangement. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Is there anyone else to speak on this item?
Tyka Price.
Good evening. Thank you for allowing me to speak before you tonight. My name is Tyka Price, and I'm director and co-owner of Lakefront Montessori Academy, a private school here in Titusville that serves 2.5-year-olds through 8th grade. At Lakefront, we pride ourselves on having a family atmosphere. We want our students and their families to feel as if they are part of the community and not just a number in a large crowded institution. Students are valued as individuals, and our students strive to make sure that every child receives the tools and individualized instruction he or she needs to be successful. The combination of excellent student-to-teacher ratios, multi-grade level classrooms, specially trained and dedicated staff, and hands-on relevant material combine to offer our children a quality educational environment that not only prepares them for high school, but ultimately for life. Many of our students have come from other educational environments where they were struggling academically or socially, and several of them have varying exceptionalities, including autism, specific learning disabilities, ADHD, and traumatic brain injury. At Lakefront, we believe that it is our job to teach the way our students learn, not their job to learn the way we teach, and we will do everything we can to help our students be successful. Sadly, Lakefront has needed to become a safe haven for students terribly bullied at other schools. And before transferring to our school, one of our students was viciously attacked by several students outside of a local elementary school and stomped on repeatedly, leaving shoe imprints on his chest. Another student at a different Titusville elementary school was assaulted in one class, and when moved to a different classroom, she had difficulty learning because students were throwing desks through classroom windows. Thankfully, both are flourishing since being transferred to our school. We currently have 119 students from areas as far north as Scottsmore, as far south as Palm Bay, as far east as Merritt Island, and as far west as Christmas, but we want to help more children. We have a petition of support with 253 signatures from encouraging people in our community and a waiting list of about 200 children that are trying to get into our school, and that list is growing daily. One of the hardest parts of my job is talking to parents that are desperate to find an alternative to the educational program that they are in, and often these parents are in tears describing to me situations, and it hurts me that I can't help them because we simply don't have enough room. I would like to ask for a conditional use permit to build the 3,600 square foot building on our current property so that we can add additional classrooms and accept approximately 60 new students in the fall. Every child deserves a fighting chance to reach their fullest potential. Please approve our building project so we can help more children do just that. Thank you.
Any questions?
I just have,
Mr. Rogers?
I just have one question.
Sorry.
Your 200 kind of jumped out at me because I remember reading this last night, actually. Currently have a waiting list of 100. In what amount of time has your waiting list gone from 100 to 200?
It was 200 it's been over the past 5 years. We have some students that are on it that have been attempting to get into the school for 5 years, but because of the number in that specific grade level, we haven't had room open up. Typically, our students start in preschool. We do have students that transfer from the outside, but over the last several years, it's been harder and harder to get into the school because our students just roll over every year. So typically, if they're not starting in preschool, at least the last several years, they're not hardly ever getting in. So it's about 200 students. Some of them, I think 5 years is about the limit as far as where I'm saying. And then some have fallen off because they've aged out of our school. So it's approximately 200.
This is not a special needs school. It just happens that you have a number of special needs students.
Yes, we would consider our school an inclusive environment. Okay. It's a regular education classroom, typically with about 25 to 30 students in a class with 3 teachers, but we have several special needs students that are educated in the classroom. We do not have any self-contained classrooms, and we like that the way it is because we're able to include them in everything that we do in the classroom.
And do you skew more towards the young end of the age spectrum, or is it pretty evenly distributed up to 8th grade, or?
Mostly relatively evenly distributed. So we have 2.5 years old is the kind of the youngest student that we have, and starting in preschool, and then it goes to VPK. And the classrooms are divided, so we have one classroom that's kindergarten 1st and 2nd, another classroom that's 3rd to 5th, and another classroom that's 6th to 8th grade. And it's pretty evenly spaced out in those grade levels.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Grodd?
I have a couple of them. Lois, nice to see you. I don't know if it would be questions to you or to Lois, or maybe the two of you could help me with just two specific. You mentioned, and I read the staff report on page 32, it's the parking comment. So you mentioned that you have an agreement with the church that provides accessory parking, and one of the members mentioned that church is open on Sunday and the school isn't, so you're not going to have a conflict with that. Is that agreement something that's irrevocable, or is it an agreement that the city would be party to for revocation? Because if you don't have the required parking, then you would become substandard. The question for staff is, reading the report on the number of parking spaces needed for classrooms, is the parking proposed meeting that condition, or is the proposed agreement, or the agreement that would be in effect, adequate to eliminate the need of the required parking on site?
Now, we will be adding paved parking places to meet the new code requirement. Not to get too far in the weeds, but the code was much different when the variance was granted to reduce the number of parking. It would have required like 50 or 60 parking spaces because the school wasn't identified properly. In years since, the code has been revised and we can meet the current code now. The variance really is not an issue for or against. And the school, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Price, but the lease agreement they got for the new parking spaces that are half on the school property and half on the church property, but they got a lease agreement for a 10-year, which is what the code requires.
I see. And those are accessory to minimum that would be required.
Right.
And for staff, I went to the site and saw it, and I went to go around the circle pavement, but it doesn't go around past the dumpster. You're going to add pavement to create that new area?
Well,
The circular drive that shows here, that,
we're required to, the fire department requiring us to expand that 10-foot drive to a 12-foot drive to accommodate fire trucks. And new paved parking spaces will be on the road that's in just before you get to the main portion of the school property.
I understand, and the way this illustrates it, it's going to be a curved drive that'll go around those parking spaces and then exit back out the driveway.
Correct.
So what I was getting to is a second question for you, and maybe you can help me with that. Your student population, do you bus any of your students in? They're all transported individually?
Right, and then they just come into a car loop,
Right,
so they're
right,
not
right,
parking.
right.
Yeah.
That's, I'm with you there. That's
Yeah.
how most parents drop their kids off for school. Thank you.
Yeah.
You answered my questions.
And in addition to that, coming in from Hopkins all the way through the church property, you got a long backup space, you know?
Yes,
So there's not any
yes.
backup of traffic on Hopkins or any
Yes.
other adjoining streets.
Thank you.
Any other questions of the applicant? Next card, Lori.
Are Edwards and La Quinta West?
Good evening. Thank you for this opportunity to speak on behalf of Lake Fern Montessori Academy. I want to speak both as a parent and as a grandparent. Back in the early 90s, my wife and I were both working parents, and we had a need to have a safe, good educational place for our daughter to attend, and we chose Lake Fern. They gave her more than an education. They inspired her. Mr. Price taught her how to play basketball. And she moved on eventually to Astronaut High School. She became the starting center on the basketball team, ensuring a scholarship for a ride to Indian River College down in Indian River County. Fast forward to 2007, I believe it was. This is my granddaughter. This is my wife's daughter. She was attending Mims Elementary. She was the tallest kid in the class. But she had an issue. She had delayed speech. Very smart girl, but she just couldn't get it out. They put her on an improvement plan, and they recommended that she be retained. And so I went to Lake Fern, the place where my daughter had gone to school, and I asked them to consider admitting her and working with her, and they did. My granddaughter is now, She should be getting her A degree from Eastern Florida. May, I think it is. She left Lake Fern, went to Temple. She was AB honor roll at Lake Fern. She made 1B the whole time. She went to Temple, and at Temple she graduated from the AB honor roll and went to Eastern Florida. What's most important is this girl that they were going to put on an education plan at the age of 15 became a published author. This is a book that she wrote and published. If you go and Google LaQuincy West, this book comes up. Now, I've got a grandson, my youngest grandson. His name is Jason West. Jason also attended Lake Fern. He started at 2.5 years old. He was in diapers. And unfortunately, Jason's not as tall as LaQuincy. He's a shorty. But Mr. Price taught him how to play basketball, taught him defense. And he was a tenacious little defensive guy, but when he went to astronaut, I mean, he can't play ball there. So he turned his attention to Boy Scouting. On Saturday, Jason, we're going to have his Coat of Honor ceremony for his Eagle Scout. He is an Eagle Scout. The reason he's not here today is because he's in Lakeland. He's at the State Science Fair. He won second place in the engineering division, and he won an $80,000 scholarship to attend Florida Institute of Technology. This all happened because of Lake Fern. Trust me, this all happened because of Lake Fern. So what we have right now is we have a capacity issue. These folks could do more if they had greater capacity.
You need an extra minute, sir.
Oh, can I use her time? We fill out 2 cards.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm talking for you now. Okay, but at any rate, seriously, I can't say enough about that school. The atmosphere, what they give the kids, I just can't say enough for it. So I'm very hopeful that you will approve the expansion plan tonight because Titusville needs that school. Need that school bad. And I shouldn't say just Titusville because I know kids that come from all over that go to that school. And I've never had a parent that was unhappy with the education that their kids received at Lake Fern. One last thing. I talked about my grandson being an Eagle Scout. He's part of what's called the Three Amigos. One of the Amigos is here tonight. There are 3 best friends from Lake Fern that are all Eagle Scouts. But in addition, his brother is also an Eagle Scout. I think that's unprecedented. I don't think it's any other middle school in this county that can boast having 4 Eagle Scouts, and because they got inspired. They got inspired as friends at Lake Fern. So there's a lot of reasons to approve this tonight. Thank you for your time. And I'm under time, right?
Well, kind of, sort of.
Thank you.
Did you want to speak? He's got time remaining. Laura, you need the cards.
Yes, one more. Amy Hammer.
Good evening. My name is Amy Hammer. I'm the kindergarten, first and second grade teacher at Lake Fern Montessori Academy. But when I discovered Lake Fern, it was as a parent. My oldest son is autistic and was in a school where his needs were not being accommodated. My husband and I began to look for a place where his needs would be accommodated and he would be loved and taken care of. This is what we found at Lake Fern. These amazing teachers told us things, listened to us when we told them things that he liked, that he enjoyed. They used those things in the classroom with him. We told them things that we had found at school or at home that worked with him, and they incorporated those things in the classroom, and in turn told us things that they found that worked in the classroom so we could incorporate those tactics at home. They worked tirelessly with him to overcome many obstacles, both educationally and behaviorally, that he had been experiencing. They became a family to us long before I began working there. When I was given the opportunity to work at the school, I jumped at the chance to be able to pay forward just a small part of what was done for our family. All 3 of my children have since attended Lake Fern, and they have all excelled as they've moved into high school. As Mr. Edwards pointed out, 2 of my sons are Eagle Scouts. I truly believe that the best way to teach a student is to connect with them and find the ways that they learn best, not force them to learn the way that we teach. This is what we do at Lake Fern, and by being allowed to extend our campus, we'll be able to reach more students and help more families like my own. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Any other cards?
No, sir.
Okay. I'll close the public hearing. That comes back to the commission. Any discussion?
Chairman, down here, I know.
Oh, yeah. Can't see it.
I know, yeah. Hi. Just FYI, my daughter is on the waiting list. She's one of the 200, but she's going to another
You need to
Montessori
recuse
school.
yourself.
I don't think you can vote on this one.
No, I definitely can't vote on this, but she's in another Montessori school, and I love the idea. She just started Monday, actually doing the regular school, and then she's going VPK in August. But I think it's a great learning. What do you want to say? Scheme learning, whatever way of learning. I think it's a great school type, and I've heard lots of good things about Lake Fern, and that's all I want to say. Thanks.
Okay. Any other discussion? Anyone care to make a motion? Mr. Grodd.
I'll make a motion following staff's recommendation to approve CUP number 10-2022 to expand the existing private school in accordance with the two conditions, relocation of the southern extent of the playground fence to meet the minimum 50-foot setback and the landscape yards illustrated on the site plan consistent with the landscaping requirements of Chapter 30, Article 3, Division 10 of the Code.
Mr. Faison.
I second.
Any other discussion? Any discussion? Okay, Lori, roll call.
Secretary Grant,
Yes.
Member Rogers,
Yes.
Member Faison,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Richardson,
Just as I did in 1986 or 85. Yes.
Member Garad,
Yes.
Member Perez,
Yes.
Member Aton.
Yes. Okay. We are recommending approval, and will this be heard at the council meeting next week?
This is also scheduled for April 11th, next week.
Next week. And I want to, since he's here, I want to recognize Lois Ward, because you've heard me talk about several times about putting the land development regulations together. He and I worked on them. It took about 6 months. And you can thank him that we have a land development code. Thank you for coming. Next item, item 9D. We'll let you get out for a few minutes. Thank you.
We're going to talk about antennas. Nobody likes antennas, I guess.
Be positive. Nobody dislikes antennas.
Okay, Eddie? 9D.
All right, item 9D, on page 64 of 145. On January 8th, 2019, the council directed staff to draft amendments to develop standards for the location and screening of antennas and associated equipment. The city's land development regulations are largely silent on the permitted location of antennas and provides a general performance standard statement. In section 30-339F, it requires that antennas, satellite dishes, and mechanical equipment shall be screened from all public streets. The draft ordinance proposes antennas as a new use category in the accessory use table. Section 28-342 of the code provides a definition and introduces new use limitations and performance standards. I did want to clarify that the staff believes with regards to the height limitation, so if you've read the ordinance, you've seen that there's a limitation of 20 feet, and that according to our understanding of how the ordinance is written, that would allow a wireless communication device to be taller if it were attached on top of a building than what the maximum building height is within the zoning district. So if the zoning district, let's say it limits the maximum building height at 35 feet, and you have a building that's built at exactly 35 feet, then if they wanted to add cellular antenna on top of the building, it would permit that structure to be taller than the current building height. So if the commission is not interested in that being the case, then additional language can be added to that, and so that would just be part of your recommendation tonight. But just wanted to clarify that point of the current draft of the ordinance.
Any questions of staff? Mr. Rogers?
I guess I forgot to turn that off. I feel like I did have a question, though. It may come to me.
Mr. Aton?
So, I'm old, and I'm also in the AV business. I didn't see anything referencing television antennas in a residential. Is there an exception, or is that a whole different issue that's not included? Because they do still exist. Not many people have them anymore, but they do still work.
So the subsection on page 69 of 145, subsection C1 talks about satellite earth stations. Those would be like a satellite dish.
I get the DirecTV and Dish Network and all that, and soon Starlink, but this is an over-the-air FM TV antenna.
Okay.
That does not fit that description.
FM antennas are included in the definition on that same page in subsection B. It's the third line from the bottom. Multi or single bay FM and RV signals. So if it's an FM signal, or if you feel like it needs to be further clarified that this would include audio and visual antennas, then that could be a recommendation to include. I'll just also add that this is based on a model ordinance and that the staff is not experts on.
No, I get it, and nor am I. But it's kind of an industry. I mean, I think generally that probably works. The putting FM together with RV kind of threw me a little bit, but and then it talks about the AM antenna. But it talks about them for broadcast purposes, not reception purposes. But I mean, I think it's probably fine. I just didn't want somebody that has one outside their house and they've had it there for 70 years to come.
I don't want to bust your bubble, but FM is not TV. FM is radio. UHF, VHF is television.
You're right. Yeah, it is.
In addition to that, a lot of the over-the-air stuff now, OTA, is digital. They don't. You can put an antenna up outside, but they now do OTAs is digital, and so you can take a digital antenna and put inside your house, and then with that you need, because the old school TVs, that over-the-air antenna waves are now digital. So that,
yeah, I realize that, but the digital doesn't, the transmission style, it's the way it decodes it. But either way, I think the other thing is, I think it says multi or single bay. It probably is supposed to be multi or single band, would be my guess.
Yeah.
But again, it's just, or maybe just say television. and be done with it.
Mr. Grod, you had the light on?
I did, and I need to ask Eddie a few questions. You touched on your opening comment about height in buildings, and at the last meeting I was asking questions, or actually my first meeting asking questions about building height and being somewhat familiar with what determines the building's maximum height as a zoning restriction placed on by an arbitrary code. Building height is a zoning restriction. This is going to be a zoning restriction. This isn't a building code restriction. It's not the International Building Code height restriction. And what concerns me goes back to what I've seen numerous times. The intention to limit the height, it becomes interpretative later on. Whether it's 20 feet above a height of a building that's 20 feet, or whether it's 20 feet above the appurtenance of the building that projects another 35 feet above the building. I could use an example, but it concerns me. I won't, and that is that I think the commission and the council need to be clear that when they set maximum height of something that's an attachment to a building, they have to refer to the maximum height from a point, so it isn't interpretive based on some other projected part of the building that was interpreted based on a building code application as opposed to a zoning code application. So an example would be a facade of a building. And I'll put this question out and see if you can answer it for me. I have a building that's a flat roof building. It has architectural appurtenance, and they project above that height. That's allowed to occur because the building's height is at a maximum feet based on a zoning restriction. But upon the building permit's review, the building code's interpretation is that you can have, building codes allow this, appurtenance, structures that are associated with the building, either architecturally or even mechanically. Think about an elevator and the elevator's mechanical room that pulls the elevator up by cables, as opposed to an elevator that's pushed up by a piston. One could be on a flat roof that doesn't project above that. The other is going to be an appurtenant on top of that roof, and it's going to exceed the height of the building, intended to be limited by a zoning code, not interpreted by a building code. In this instance, if I built a building, it was a flat roof, it had an elevator, it had a projection on that that was allowed, it exists. It's a 15-foot projection that holds the elevator. If I come forward and place my 20-foot TV antenna, not that I would, on top of that projected portion of the roof, does that exceed the 20 feet height above the roof line?
So I don't want to answer hypothetical questions just because I don't have all the specifics in that hypothetical, and I
Sure, I respect that.
But I will let you know that the way that we determine building height is by the Florida Building Code's definition, which is the average of the roof height. So if it is a sloped pitch, it's not the very top of the pitch, it's the average of the roof structure.
Oh. And this is critical to my question. In deliberating something as a city code, there's no mention in this code of the International Building Code or interpretations thereunder. This is a zoning restriction, 20-foot height building restriction. I would believe, and please answer if you would, if you hear this say it won't be 20 feet above the building, but it's 20 feet above the projected appurtenance of that building based on this interpretation of the average building height, you therein have this antenna 35 feet, not 20, because it's on top of a projection roof. And this is a subject that I spoke on my very first meeting. It still concerns me that you take a zoning restriction, and good meaning, everyone here is 20 feet above the building. You see a building, you see a point where you're projecting at, but on the peaked roof example, this antenna could be 50% higher than 20 feet because you're at a slope. So all of a sudden, 20 feet's the midpoint of the building. Another 20 feet's above that. Now 20 feet above that's interpreted to be acceptable. And someone comes and asks the question, why is the antenna 40 feet above the building? Well, because it's 40 feet, it's not 40 feet above the building, it's 20 feet above the average height of the building. And this point is it's a zoning restriction, it's not a building code restriction. If it was a building code restriction, you would be allowed to build it based on the building code. So the point of my question is just my statement. Be sure you recognize in your recommendations regarding limitations of height that it's interpretive, and that if you're seeing it one way, it may not be that way in reality. And I think that's a point in fact, rather than supposition where it may or may not have. There are many examples as I've run into it myself, and it's call it my goal in life is to clarify the meaning of a height. So in this ordinance, and you said you weren't, this was kind of from a model ordinance, may I suggest that maybe you kind of deliberate with yourself and the building staff or whoever's the interpreter of the building codes and ask the question, are we trying to limit this height based on what we expect the height to be, a flat roof 20-foot high building versus a peaked roof, and a very projected peak roof? Think of a church steeple. Picture the antenna on top of the church steeple, and somebody would say they draw a 90-degree angle from the midpoint and say, see, it's a 20-foot building, but the church steeple is up here, and the antenna is up there. Does that make sense to anybody but me?
Yeah.
Okay. So my point to throw that out is if you're going to go back and craft this or look at it or be more concerned with height limitations, I would just put out there maybe try to figure out how you really restrict the height rather than the interpretative height. Not everybody has a flat roof, of course, most people probably don't, but wherein you do, you could see two people next door to one another. One guy's got bad reception because he can't go more than 20 feet above the height. The other other person has a peaked roof and his antenna is 30 feet in the air. He gets good reception. So that's my 2 bits on the only thing I saw on that has any interest for me. And thank you for answering my questions.
Mr. Rogers.
Does this affect, so this does affect, rather, if someone wants to put a cell phone tower in that's standing on the ground, and, you know, there are height restrictions for that, or, I mean, it's not just for building.
Right, that's a whole separate use.
Okay.
Tonight's discussion is accessory antennas on top of existing structures.
Okay.
Mr. Aton.
It says this was brought forward. Do we know what problem we're trying to fix?
Well, I can give some context. So originally this came when there was a request to add a cell tower to the top of one of the condos in town. And there were no standards such as making it compatible architecturally with color or any type of fascia. And so the request was to clarify what standards should there be in the code.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions of staff? Officer Willie, do you want to address this as part of the public hearing? No, no.
I think the height of 20 feet is perfect. However high 20 feet is.
Okay, I assume we don't have any cars, so I'll open and close the public hearing. What do you want to do?
I have one more question.
Mr. Rudd.
Acting Chairman. Is it possible when you explore this, if you do explore it, to look at the height based on what would be the ground elevation and find a standard? So if you were trying to project above a roof line, regardless of pitch of roof or appurtenance, if the intention is to not be above 2 stories or 20 feet, begin the measurement from a point that's not related to the roof. So for example, I live in a neighborhood. All the houses are generally the same. They all have about the same pitch of roof. They all have the same height, give or take a few feet. One thing that's standard is at any point I measure my roof, if I measure it from the ground elevation, or better yet, the center line of the road in front of my house, I have a standard by which all are equal. And where I put it on my roof could go anywhere as long as it doesn't go of so many feet, like the building height, so many feet above that adjacent property. I know that some of your codes, some of the codes in Titusville, some other codes are written around a point of origin of the height being the road in front of the house. I've seen that on some conditions of approval that are relevant, that you want to set the building's height not to be exceeding a point of reference, a benchmark, a center line, etc. And it would seem standardized at that point to be all the same for everybody.
Sure, so that could be added. It would be a change of the way that height is generally looked at currently. So it would be another way that we'd have to introduce height. We'd have to look at the building height per the Florida Building Code and then look at an ordinance about cellular communication devices added to a structure based on a different definition of height. So it's possible, but it would be 2 different standards.
And I certainly appreciate that's exactly in line with what I'm trying to do is throw out there a concept. The height of something is subject to interpretation, as you reiterated. It's the building code interpretation. When my experience, and even tonight, when you are setting a zoning standard, it's not relevant to the building code. It's relevant to the zoning code. If you say it won't be more than 20 feet above sea level, it's 20 feet above sea level. You can design your building any way you want. You just can't exceed that point of origin. And I'm afraid there's a lot of that interpretation when you get the end product that it's compounding, and it leaves staff sometimes in a dilemma. What am I supposed to see 20 feet measured from? So that's my 2 butts is maybe consider reviewing where the point of origin for measurement is when you've got building height limitations, making it more uniform for everybody as opposed to interpretive would be my final comment. Thank you.
And I assume Brad can explain all this to the city council.
Yes.
Any other discussion? Anyone care to make a motion? Anyone care to make a motion, Mr. Grimes?
Since I was the most talkative, and I apologize, I'll make a motion to approve the ordinance with a comment on the motion that at least we get maybe an exploration of that height limit, and if there's a way that might be addressed in the future. It may not be this code, it may not be this ordinance, but it may be in the future a relook at that.
Second.
There's a motion made and seconded to recommend approval of the ordinance with some clarification, as Mr. Garrod explained. Any other discussion? Mr. Rogers? Okay. Any other discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Member Faison?
Yes.
Member Perez?
Yes.
Member Aton?
Yes.
Member Garrod?
Yes.
Member Rogers?
Yes.
Vice Chairman Richardson?
Yes.
Secretary Grant?
Yes.
That was kind of weak. Okay, next item is mobile food vendors ordinance.
Yes, sir. Mobile food vendors ordinance, item 9E. On December 13th, 2022, the council directed staff to draft amendments to the Code of Ordinances, Chapter 11, Licenses and Business Regulations, specifically related to mobile food vendors to be consistent with Florida statutes. The City Code of Ordinances needs to be amended as follows to be in compliance with Florida Statute 509.102, sections 509.102, sections 11-332A, 11-340C, 11-341B, need to be amended to indicate mobile food dispensing vehicles, as defined in Florida statutes, are not required to obtain a city business tax receipt, but shall maintain a current state license as required under Florida statutes. These sections need to be amended to indicate mobile food dispensing vehicles, as defined in Florida statutes, and that maintain a current state license as required under Florida statutes. The city may limit the location of mobile food dispensing vehicles, but cannot prohibit them from operating within the entirety of the city. Also, the definition of a truck or trailer to be eligible for the state preemption specifies self-contained utilities, including gas, water, electricity, and liquid waste disposal. Currently, the vendors do not meet the definition if they obtain electricity from a building or other hookup, or obtain a water supply via a hose connection from a building or other water supply. The draft ordinance is consistent with the Florida statutes. So, context, again, this is just a change to Florida statutes, and we're adjusting our land development regulations to be consistent as far as not requiring a business tax receipt, and then applying where food trucks or mobile food vendors are currently permitted, and applying it to this definition.
Any questions of the staff? Mr. Faison?
Do you know what the driving force was to not require a city business tax receipt?
I don't. That was
Florida state statutes.
right. So that was Florida state statutes that were changed that is requiring this change from the city's land development regulations. But what inspired the legislature to make that change, I don't know that information.
Yeah, I think that's just. I mean, not that I'm in favor of taxes, but that's some revenue that the cities could use, and they took that away and said you can operate in our city without one. And I just was wondering why you know.
They're whittling away at home rule, and we need to fight back.
I've got a pitchfork.
That's why Member Stokel was in Tallahassee this week. Yes, Mr. Rogers.
I got to admit to probably an unfair and decidedly uncool bias against food trucks. I always think they look sort of trashy and, dare I say, a bit third world. Even though I have gotten some cool food occasionally from it. But it does seem to me that I guess I just kind of feel like I'd like to see in this city, I'd like to see them show up at specific locations at specific times, but not be sort of scattered around the city hither and yon. And maybe we can't do anything about that. Maybe that's part of, us getting exempted somehow by Tallahassee. I'm not quite sure how that all works out. But And I understand the need to protect, our local restaurants. I see that there's a rule that they can't be within 500 feet of the property line of a restaurant selling a similar product. But I guess what I'm asking is, this exemption applies to only completely self-contained units, right? They kind of need nothing. They pull up and they've got everything. And so I guess my question is this maybe not such a big deal simply because not that many of these trucks can do without water and power, that they, are most of these trucks dependent on water and power service to function somewhere?
Well, the definition for mobile food dispensing vehicle that we've added, or we're proposing to add to the code, does talk about self-contained utilities. I can't speak to the ratio of how many food trucks have that capability as opposed to others that don't.
Right.
But this is specific to those vehicles that have all of the utilities.
Okay. And I did see that there were certain places where they were allowed to operate, but other places where they were not allowed to operate by, what page is that on?
Is that related to the zoning district section, subsection G on page 78?
I think it was a zoning type page, 78. I always have a hard time reading these. What does it basically say? Where can they operate?
Subsection G says zoning districts. Mobile food dispensing vehicles may be permitted within the specified zoning districts as described. Shoreline mixed use, community commercial, regional commercial, planned industrial park, and light industrial services and warehousing, M1. Then it goes on to say downtown mixed use, all of the sub-districts, downtown, midtown, uptown, and civic waterfront as part of an approved special event. So outside
All of those are just an approved special event.
Only the downtown mixed use districts that I just mentioned are for special events. So in other words, a food truck could not operate in downtown unless it's part of a special event.
Okay. Where's Shoreline mixed use? Where's that?
Shoreline mixed use, there's not a whole lot of area in the city that still has it's mostly along the property east of US 1.
Okay.
Member Faison.
Help me with syntax, okay? The city may limit the location of mobile food dispensing vehicles, but cannot prohibit them from operating within the entirety of the city.
Where are we reading from?
So this is going back to that section that you had read previously on page 74. And this is on the middle to the lower half of the paragraph, right after FSS 509.241. The sentence states again, the city may limit the location of mobile food dispensing vehicles, but cannot prohibit them from operating within the entirety of the city.
So in short, the city could not say there are no zoning districts within the city's limits that we would permit a mobile food vendor. So we have to permit it at least in one zoning district.
So you can limit them, but you can't limit them.
You can limit them. Correct.
Okay, you can limit them, but you can't prohibit them.
Oh, right. Throughout the city.
So they can still go there. But they can still go there.
So you can outline which zoning districts they should not be permitted in. So you can prohibit them from certain zoning districts.
Correct.
You can't prohibit them from all of your zoning districts.
Okay.
Next was Mr. Garrod, then Mr. Aton.
Two questions on the origins of this and the statute. It appears that what you had were mobile vendors driving from town to town, and each case, like in the prior ordinance, would have been required to get a business tax receipt from Titusville Cocoa, Rockledge, Melbourne, and however many towns I chose to drive to. The statutory preemption that you're putting this just says you get a business tax receipt from some place you probably are originating from, and then you can go mobile, or a state business tax if that was appropriate, and that way you're not over-regulating these vendors from town to town to town. Is that how I read this to be?
Correct.
And then with the prohibition to like-kind food at a place the food truck would be located at, it's going to be a little bit far-reaching, I'm sorry. So if I had the steak restaurant on the river and I brought a food truck in to sell seafood, I wouldn't be able to do that because I sell steaks in my restaurant. My food truck I have, of course, is selling seafood. Would this say you cannot do that? You'd have to sell seafood in the restaurant to sell seafood in your food truck, and conversely, the food truck could serve steaks because the steak restaurant serves steaks.
Well, there's a limitation on how many feet? 500
Yes,
feet?
sir. That's on page 78. It's subsection H, distance requirements. And it says, no mobile food dispensing vehicle shall locate within 500 feet as measured from the property line of any lawful permanent business which sells the same goods during the hours of operations of said business. That language is vague. It's currently in the code and could be subject to interpretation based on the administrator. So it's not black and white if that's, you're selling macadamia nuts as opposed to cashews. Are those, you're selling nuts in both cases, or?
Well, I think it would have to be a little bit more profound than different varieties of nuts. And what concerned me by that comment was 500 feet. If you look at a commercial development, any number of small business restaurants I'm familiar with here, 500 feet would take you past the property boundary. So if I chose in my scenario, I sell steaks, but I want to have a food truck that sells shrimp, I'm on my own property that's only 500 feet wide. The answer is you won't be able to do that under this language. I can sell steaks from my food truck, but you won't be able to sell seafood because you have a steak restaurant that doesn't have seafood on your menu. Am I reading that correctly, or am I misreading it?
Again, I'll read the section. No mobile food dispensing vehicle shall locate within 500 feet as measured from the property line of any lawful permanent business which sells the same goods during the hours of operation of said business.
And that's statutorily? This is a reflection of the statute, or was that accessory to the statute for Titusville's ordinance?
Those are standards that are currently in the code for mobile food vendors that is being carried forward.
Thank you.
Would this be?
Mr. Aton.
Two questions. One, I'm not super clear on the exception as it relates to if you plug into a building or an outlet, or you connect a water hose that's provided to you on the property that you're parking. Is that, if they do that, they aren't party to this? Or is this meant to correct that and encompass that scenario as well? It was on like 72, I think.
I think you're right.
It was 74?
74, yeah.
74 at the bottom part of the paragraph?
Yeah.
Sure. So it says also the definition of a truck or trailer to be eligible for this state preemption. So in order to operate without a business tax receipt from the city, you would have to have a self-contained food truck with utilities, including gas, water, electricity, and liquid waste disposal. So if you have to connect to this power from an existing structure, an existing building, or water supply from a hose, then you do not meet this exemption, and you would have to get a business tax receipt.
And is it if you have to or if you do? Because a lot of these, the design of the vehicle, they power from a generator, which you can, people say the generator's too noisy. I got power here. Do you want power? And they plug into power, but technically the vehicle could be self-contained if they ran the generator. Same with water. They've got a water tank, but somebody says, well, if you want to extra wash your dishes or whatever. You can have an endless supply of water if you connect a hose up over here. By connecting that hose or connecting the power cord, do they immediately become this, or is it the virtue of the design that they could do it, they want to or not? I mean,
Right. So my understanding
don't
is
know
that
how
it's
you
not
enforce
related
it.
to the capability of the vehicle, whether it's capable to connect, it's are they connecting?
So as soon as they connect, they then, city can come knocking and say, where's your tax BTR receipt for the city of Titusville?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then the second was I've been to some like wedding receptions and things that are hosted at homes and birthday parties, and they'll have a food truck come and park in the driveway and serve just the guests at the party at a private residence in a residential neighborhood. How does that apply in here, if it applies at all, other than the BTR piece of this?
So the zoning districts where this this new use mobile food dispensing vehicle is proposed in the ordinance is in the community commercial, the regional commercial, the M1, which is our light industrial, the P public, all of the downtown districts related to a special event, and then the shoreline mixed use. So it's, as written, it's not currently enabling the mobile food dispensing vehicles in the residential districts. There could be cases where there are existing single-family homes or residential structures in those zoning districts that would then be permitted because they're in the appropriate zoning district. However, if you'd like to include in your recommendation that this be expanded to the residential districts, you can do that as well.
I don't think for public consumption in the traditional sense of a food truck where people just walk up, but it certainly happens, and you know, it's like a lot of things. It's a few hours by the time you figure it out. It's, you know, you're not going to catch it on an enforcement side. It's kind of no harm, no foul, but in the spirit of clarity and not creating things that haunt us in the future, like Mr. Gerardo was talking about. You know, do we put something in here related to private property, private events out in exempted or in limited zoning districts? Or I don't know. I just kind of bringing it up as things that you know, might be an issue in the future, so we don't see these things a second or third time.
Mr. Faison.
I like the idea of special events, you know.
Private property attendant.
Well, I'd just say in all of the limited area, in the prohibited areas, allowing it on a case-by-case basis on, as you suggested. But my light was lit up in reference to that H that Mr. Garrett was talking about, and was wondering if, going back down to that subsection, if that was more targeted at competing businesses and not the same business.
It is intended for like products. So it's a hot dog, Nathan's hot dog, brick and mortar, having a prohibition against a hot dog food truck within 500 feet. That prohibition exists in our code and is being carried forward into this ordinance.
Now, but Nathan's themselves can put their own Nathan's hot dog truck out front of their own property, is what I'm saying.
The owner of one business versus the other is not discussed.
Okay.
It's the selling of the same item in a truck within 500 feet of a business. It doesn't say owned by another person. That's not a qualifier that's included in the language.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Rogers.
I guess, is there any intent in any of what we're trying to do here that is trying to prevent the proliferation of food trucks through the city, or is that just separate from this issue right now?
Well, again, this ordinance change came about because of the change to the state statute. So really the only issue is being
It's just
consistent
whether
with
they have
state
to get the
statute
tax or not.
saying that we will allow mobile food vendors to operate within the city without requiring a BTR.
Okay.
As long as they're within.
Mr. Grodd.
Just as a note, and again, recommendation later would be that if there would be no reason, as you just mentioned, Chelsea, that it was done for competition, adjacent properties, like kind, taking away from those businesses valuable customers. If there was a way to express that in the proposal that would exempt on the property of like kind, but it just, there are occasions where restaurants have food trucks for good reason, and they don't sell the food the food truck sells. It happens. And you mentioned something that's the scariest word of all, is you have to interpret that. And then you're asking yourself, do I want to throw myself on the bed of nails there by interpreting that it's okay, and the person complains and says, well, this ordinance says you can't do this if you don't sell that food, and the steak restaurant's not selling shrimp. So you're going to have to shut that thing down. And the interpretation was, well, we meant the adjacent property owners, but it doesn't say that. So it may be something to blend in with this, that there would be an exemption for the restaurant that's located where the food truck is, where there's no conflict with the owner who's the proprietor of one and has the temporary service of a dissimilar food because it's the Grant Seafood Festival, or any kind of example that might be getting the kind of popularity where someone's using the food truck to attract customers, and that's good. And, you know, where do you build the McDonald's in a one restaurant town? You build the Burger King next door. Economics. So just my two bits is maybe consider somehow weaving a lack of an interpretation, a statement that says that's applied to the adjacent like kind or dissimilar restaurants, but it's not meant to restrict the owner from having a dissimilar food service on his property while he's having his restaurant, for what it's worth.
Okay. Well, just to be sure, I'll open and close the public hearing. I see a real dilemma coming in the future, restructuring of this whole thing. Because if you remember, Brad sent us an email to watch the council meeting at 5:30. In that council meeting, those consultants proposed that we take out all the parking in Mariner Way. And we put a line of paved food truck spots in a semicircle pattern around the Mariner Way. Now, they are within 500 feet of existing restaurants downtown, so I see a real conflict coming if the city adopts that.
A couple of points on that. So that was a concept. It's not anything that's been approved, adopted. That's part of the comprehensive plan visioning for 20 years out. So that's not anything that's coming forward for site plan review anytime soon or anything like that.
I know that.
The other thing is the consultant did mention that the parking, there would actually be more parking in that area than what is currently existing. They had shown some parking, and of course, this is at the very high level concept, so it's not anything that has been verified as far as can it be done, you know. But the parking is shown along the edges of the existing historic buildings, and then along Indian River Avenue, there's some parking and a new parking lot east of Indian River Avenue. So net, there would be a gain in parking, but I do believe that the concept was very small and hard to see. So it looked like all of the parking was being removed from that area.
I think that's a concept plan we'll never see, quite frankly. Any other discussion? Mr. Aton.
One last comment. When we talk about the section about dissimilar food, there was a dust up of between a food truck and a brick and mortar a couple years ago that made social media. I don't think I ever made anything other than that. But the brick and mortar restaurant viewed any food truck as potentially stealing the customer. In this case, it was very dissimilar food, but because the brick and mortar guy's paying it, and then I think the other piece of this to take into consideration is the brick and mortar guy's position was the owner of the shopping center allowed the food truck to park in the parking lot and sell food when the lease that the brick and mortar guy had in that same shopping center gave him some exclusivity related to other food vendors. So how much of this gets policed where they're parking and are they allowed to park and all that, because most cases, somebody owns that property versus them. I don't even know what ordinances we have about them being able to park in a public, park or one of the parks and actually set up. But, how much of this is the city's position to police, and how much of it, gets policed by the place they're parking and they're allowed to park. I don't know the answer, just illustrating not just the cuisine issue. Ultimately, it's a competition for the dollars of the patron.
Jesse?
It is a competition issue, and the city will respond via code enforcement whenever we hear of a complaint from a local vendor, either brick and mortar or the mobile vendor. And it has only come up once or twice in my 9 years here, 9+. And so it is a touchy subject also, because then the code enforcement and city officials have to decide, is that exactly a competitive nature, or are they completely dissimilar products? And so there is some difficulty in making that decision, but I don't know how we could make it any better, or other than eliminating that section of the code, because it is somewhat subjective.
Yeah, food trucks are extremely popular now. And Willie and I have the Sunrise Rotary Car Show next weekend at Fox Lake Park. We had 8 or 9 last year food trucks, and Fox Lake Park was crowded. We made a lot of money that weekend. And I don't know, it's one of those things that the public likes them. If they go to some place where there's several food trucks, they can choose to eat whatever they want to. And so it's a sensitive issue. Anyone care to make a motion on this sensitive issue? Is everybody awake? Because Lori's husband said to me, he wants her home at a decent hour. So let's not beat around the bush. Okay, Mr. Faison.
I move that we approve the mobile food vendors ordinance, that they do not have to pay or obtain a BRT in the city of Titusville as long as they are a self-contained food vendor.
Mr. Faison has made the motion. Is there a second?
To clarify, does that mean that you're recommending approval of the ordinance as presented?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
What about the caveat that Mr. Anton was bringing up? Should we add that as a condition?
Chelsea, do you have any comments on whether, I think at some point we start modifying this too much.
If you had specific language, then you would have to propose that. I don't know that any specific language has been proposed.
I'm open to it. I just don't really know how to craft it on the spur of the moment without potentially opening up some other wormhole to go down.
You could also recommend that council further look at it as part of your motion. I don't know.
Yeah, my sense is it's one of those things that when it happens, it's same kind of thing. If nobody complains, and what I don't want to do is open up some language that two neighbors that fight, this guy orders a food truck and now we've created something else. So I think let sleeping dogs lie a little bit as it relates to that.
Mr. Rogers.
Well, the caveat that we were talking about is, am I correct, whether they are at the time obtaining electricity and or water, or whether they are running off of their own supplies? Is that the question that do we apply it only if they are exclusively using their own, if they are during this entire time that they're in operation in Titusville, they're using their own electricity from a generator and water from a tank?
That point is related to whether this ordinance applies to certain food trucks.
Right.
I think the caveats that were discussed are more related to the, how similar the business is and the distance requirements.
And the private event, I think,
Oh.
the one Mr. Perez was referencing that I brought up versus the connection issue.
Okay, I think I'm back out again.
Mr. Faison has made a motion. Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Okay. Seconded by Member Grant. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Member Aton,
Yes.
Member Garad,
Yes.
Secretary Grant,
Yes.
Member Faison,
Yes.
Member Rogers,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Richardson,
Yes.
Member Perez.
Yes.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is the election of officers. Chelsea, do you want to explain that?
We are absent a chairperson for this board, and as the vice chair has indicated, this is our opportunity now to elect one. We will take a recommendation from any one of you to propose who you think would be a good fit for your next chairperson. And then the chair will ask the rest of the commission if there are any other, well, first you'll ask that person if they're willing to accept the nomination. And then you shall ask the other members if there are any other nominations. And then at that point, if there's multiple nominations, then you hear each member voice the name of the person that they are selecting. And whoever has the greater number of votes is the elected chairperson.
Mr. Perez was first?
Yes, I'd like to nominate Joe Richardson for chair.
Any other nominations? Mr. Rogers?
I'd like to vigorously remove my name from consideration.
You're an alternate anyway. I would accept it, and to complete the term of Chairman Spidell, which would end in January 2024, is that right? Yeah,
I think so.
or February, either January, February next year. Okay, January 24th. Any other nominations? Any other nominations, please? I know. Roll call vote?
Vice Chairman Richardson,
Yes.
Secretary Grant,
Yes.
Member Perez,
Yes.
Member Rogers,
Yes.
Member Garad,
Yes.
Member Aton,
Yes.
Member Faison.
Yes.
Okay, we need to elect a new vice chairman. I would pass the gavel to the secretary, and I would nominate Member Aton as vice chairman.
I second that.
Any other nominations? Any other nominations? Mr. Grant,
Mr. Faison.
Mr. Faison,
I decline.
okay? Any other nominations besides Member Aton? Okay, roll call again. Lori?
Member Faison,
Yes.
Secretary Grant,
Yes.
Member Perez,
Yes.
Member Aton,
Since he didn't give me a chance to decline, yes.
Member Rogers,
Yes.
Chairman Richardson,
Yes.
Member Garad.
Yes.
And I assume Secretary Grant would like to stay in that capacity.
Absolutely.
Okay. Let's see, the next item on the agenda is we had that Live Local Act of 2023. And
Live local.
Live, okay.
I presented this ordinance, I brought it up at our last meeting, and so I wanted you to see that it had been adopted and signed by the Florida governor. And the Live Local Act is pretty long, but I wanted to point out a couple of things in this agenda item for you to read at your leisure. Section 7 is found on page 98 of your agenda packet. It's the very last paragraph on the bottom of that page, I believe. sorry, it's subsection 7A of section 7 there that talks about the municipalities' powers as are granted by this new act. And it says that municipalities must authorize multifamily and mixed-use residential in any area zoned commercial, industrial, or mixed use if at least 40% of the residential units in a proposed development are, for a period of at least 30 years, affordable. And it goes on in this section through subsections A through I at the end of page 99. That is the meat of how the city is impacted by this act, allowing developers to insert their projects into areas that are not zoned residential. The city must approve that if it meets these certain criteria. So that's section 7, and under sub 7A. On page 101, section 8 of the act creates a new rule that requires municipalities to create an inventory list of what we have, surplus lands that are available for affordable housing. That's on page 101 of your agenda packet. Page 101. Let me see. So yeah, that one is section 7. It's number 1 at the bottom of page 101, the disposition of municipal property for affordable housing. And it says at the beginning of page 102, the key sentence is each municipality shall make the inventory list publicly available on its website to encourage potential development. The next section 9 of the bill of the act is on page 106. That starts in the middle of the page. This section creates an affordable housing property exemption for property owners that designate certain percentages for certain sections of the population that fall into certain income brackets. They may get tax exemptions for providing their housing in that market. There's a lot more to it, but I thought those 3 things are pretty important to you all, and so I wanted to make it available to you. That concludes my presentation unless you have any questions.
They're allowing residential and industrial areas?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
That's what this act does.
Didn't we just decline?
That was, but this goes
it
into
has to
effect
include
July
40%
1st
affordable
of this year.
as part of the project.
Didn't it also remove rental minimums?
It removed a ability for the cities and counties to have rent control.
Yes.
It removed that.
Yes.
So noise and all the other things in industrial areas, it doesn't matter anymore?
I wouldn't say it doesn't matter, but affordable housing is more important.
Excuse me?
I wouldn't say it doesn't matter, but according to this act, affordable housing is more important than those issues and concerns.
Develop tiny homes.
But it removes rent control.
Remember Aton.
So my question's more about the implementation of this. So if staff gets an application that meets the requirements of this as from an exemption standpoint, do we still see it? And staff determines that it meets this and it's a state enforced, we really don't have a say in it.
We can't require comp plan amendments or rezonings for certain projects that meet the statutory criteria. So I'm not going to say you're not going to see it because every project is case specific.
That was my question is,
but the rezonings and the comp plans are
part
what
of-
you'll see less of if these projects are presented that meet the criteria.
Okay, so if they meet the criteria, but for some reason it has to come before us, it'll be made clear how this affects our vote or, I mean, it almost seems that we have no vote in it if, for at least that particular part of it, because it's required by the state. Is that kind of accurate?
It seems like that's the case, but this is pretty new and it's about a week old, so we're still digesting it and trying to understand it. And so I wanted to get it in front of you all so we can try to answer any questions you may come up with.
It was something we never expected from this legislature.
Yeah.
Okay, Member Faison.
Oh, I apologize. Just that I'm good.
Member K-Rod. Rod.
A couple of comments I have to make because it comes to my memory from history, a couple of similarities where legislative acts are jumped upon for good reason, affordable housing, and then they get worked out along the lines. Land restoration from strip mining. One day they came up with a strip mining law and said you had to put the dirt back in the hole. They didn't tell them how the dirt needed to be stacked, so overburden goes on the top and the good dirt went on the bottom. Then they came back and said you have to plant so many trees, federal legislation back in the day. Plant so many trees per acre to keep from having runoff occurring from the effect of stripping the land of all its vegetation. Well, that wasn't spelled out by feet or miles, it was just trees. So they put all the trees in one spot and they killed themselves out. Seems to my memory, Key West Island and a gentleman who purchased the Truman Annex. Upon purchasing the Truman Annex, he was conditioned to have affordable housing in the old barracks buildings. That's exactly what he provided for about 2 years, and then they created the new island, which used to be the fuel depot, and sold that for tons of money to people that wanted the sunset serenade out on the island. But what happened to the affordable housing is it kind of worked itself around and through the corner. And a lot of the affordable housing initiatives came from the places that no one can afford to live and work in the same place. They're driving 100 miles. I mentioned that some couple of meetings. So I suspect what you see here is an attempt to fix it, and it's probably going to get fixed again. Because there's some inherent problems here. I was noting that, and a second question for both you and Chelsea, the statute speaks about mixed use, and Titusville more refinedly calls it shoreline mixed use. I assume mixed use is mixed use. And if mixed use in the statute allows you to have any building of the height not to exceed the height of the tallest building within 1 mile, I would suggest then you could have a whole shoreline of 10-story buildings, or if you started at the southern end where you've got the new buildings approved at 150 feet, you could build the tenement houses all along the shoreline. Is that how I read it, or am I misreading?
I don't know that we have a ton of industrial and commercial along the shoreline.
I thought the statute had mixed use as a permissive area for developing affordable housing where you can't limit the height of the building.
Let's see.
I'll have to find where I highlighted that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's or mixed use. The shoreline that you referenced, though, is an overlay. It's not the underlying zoning.
Okay.
And
That answers my question.
So it's the shoreline mixed-use overlay.
Just as long as it doesn't kind of become an interpretive subject again that someone argues, no, it says mixed use and the statute says mixed use, so mixed use it is. My point is that as you consider things that are going to respond to the statutes liberalizing the rules for good reason for affordable housing, that's the main thrust of this. But there's been a lot of dialogue about affordable housing. It may be something to talk to the legislature about. You might want to refine your statute. My comment about all the trees in one place or the dirt in the hole, you might want to start, and you mentioned one of the council members was going to Tallahassee, to refine the statute is something that does happen, and they may need to adjust that a little bit, or else they're going to have some pretty interesting stuff go on there. Last time I looked, there used to be an island in Manhattan, and then now you have the Bronx, and it's all affordable housing that's very tall. And that's something that just happens as it happens. And so this commission, as well as the city council, probably should look at this and start looking at the legislature to see if you can help with other League of Cities or the Association of Counties to try to look at the pitfalls that may be coming with such liberal rules as to say poor staff. As I know, we didn't plan on 10-story buildings all the way down US 1, but that's what we're going to have if it's for affordable housing because of these kind of subtle, unrestrictive rules, for what it's worth.
Member Faison.
Let it be known that I said today, eliminating rent control or price controls throws out the definition of affordable housing. I now want to ask, what now becomes the definition of affordable housing? And how are they defining it? I don't know if this legislation goes into that, but now, we have to look into the definition thereof and the application of this right here. This just concerns me, that's all. But I'm glad that they try to do something, you know what I mean? But I think this is more for real estate investors than it is for the populace.
Mr. Rogers.
I feel like once again I'm asking a stupid question, but so what this is essentially saying is that it's not just if we want to get specific monies to assist with our affordable housing. It's that if any developer identifies an opportunity that fits into this, then he or she can propose a development that fits the state standards, override our comprehensive plan, and put whatever it is in, and we don't get to vote on it?
That'd be correct.
Wow.
Again, for the developers, this isn't for the.
Well, perhaps we need to discuss this at a meeting that there's not so much on the agenda. We talked about this at the last meeting. In fact, how crowded is our agenda for the next meeting?
I don't have that, but I was just going to say that I expect that we will have to provide some more information to you. This isn't the last time that we're going to discuss this. We'll probably have to prepare either ordinance changes to make our land development regulations compliant with this new changes. And in doing so, we'll provide you with a presentation explaining what exactly is changing.
As we talked about, this is going to be an ongoing issue that we'll discuss at several meetings. Yes.
I was going to ask, if you look at that, Eddie, I thought when the question about what is the value of affordable, I thought I read somewhere that they were targeting 50% of the median income of the county where you're enacting this. So every county's not got the same median income, and that varies as it does. So the value would vary.
Right. So there's levels to affordable housing. Again, low, very low, and so forth. And again, that's based on the median income of the area. So that's not the question really, right? When you start to impose or you do not have rent control measures, well, I built it for you. This is for affordable housing for you, but the rent is $1,500 or $3,000 that you can't afford. Because without having price controls, for example, people that live on fixed income, all right, if there are no price controls that makes it available for them, they say we built it, we have it available, but you can't control how much we rent it for. Now it's no longer affordable.
Okay. I think we discussed enough on this. Y'all agree?
Agree.
Okay. City staff, do you have any report?
No report.
City attorney?
You already got my report.
Okay. I appreciate the opportunity to serve the remainder of Jane Spidell's term. And I tell you what my philosophy is on being chairman. I'm totally different than when I was just a member, because I think the chairman has a duty to respect all the members and have them in an orderly fashion state their opinions or their feelings about any item of business. The chairman should state his last. I don't think, unlike several other commissions, I don't think the chairman should just blurt out his opinion and stifle any other discussion. I am very careful about respecting every member's rights. That's why I look back and forth, and that's the way I intend to be chairman. And I apologize for not referring you as Vice Chairman Eton and you as Secretary Grant. Jane Spidell's funeral, Member Faison and Mr. Rogers was there. You were there?
I was behind you, yeah. I was behind you. You weren't standing around.
No, there was so much kneeling and standing and kneeling and standing.
I'd never been on Episcopal service before.
Me
but
neither.
I grew up Catholic, and it's very simple.
And St. Gabriel's, and also Brad Parrish was there. St. Gabriel's, if you've never been in there, is a site. It was built in 1881. Yeah, I found out yesterday. It is a historic building. But I did not get a chance to go to Mrs. Spidell's house where there was a reception because the priest invited everybody there. And I have difficulty walking up those stairs, but understand there were some light points in the service. And Mr. Rogers had a role in the service, and it was very nice. And members, do you have any report? Any of you have anything to report? Okay, the meeting is adjourned.